In the 1750s in London, Hogarth was highlighting gin depravities of people. But France was to get its demon alcohol only in 1830, when the soldiers were coming back from Algeria in North Africa, having been given a wormwood concoction to quell fevers, prevent dysentery and ward off insects a little bit. Because it was so bitter, they took to putting it in their wine, ration enhancing the alcoholic punch, turned a green colour. The Green Hour, l'heure verte, had expanded its appeal throughout French class structure. By 1849, 26 French absinthe distilleries producing 10 million litres, which is only a small fraction of the prestigious amount of alcohol that was consumed in France at the time. Probably originating as a drink just above Lake Geneva in Switzerland, on the border with the Jura region of France, which made it cheap, bulk, and their green.
Il grimpe de la plaine à l'assaut des montagnes. Domine l'Helvétie, se mire dans le Léman. À ses pieds, le Juxois étale sa campagne. On dit de lui qu'il est balcon sur le Mont Blanc.
The Jura, the French Compte region of France, is perhaps the most visually stunning, rural, unspoilt little corner that you can find. The three main natural ridge formations that separate the river that goes to the Rhine and the river that goes to the Rhone form two layers of formidable natural defences where rebels could raid the perennially wealthy Burgundy region. Burgogne region, as some of us were taught to spell. Such an untouched backwater that, until decades after the French Revolution, serfdom was still maintained by the feudal landlords. Even up to that fateful year of 1815 for the French, local laws were able to maintain the traditional serfdom slavery, despite French national governments outlawing it. A serf could sort of own property, but not really. Inheritance, well, sort of possible, but not really. Having someone else work the land for you and you being away for 10 years? Nope. Everything you've got reverts to the landlord. The feudal chief. Until 1815. Well, the British won that year. And white slavery wasn't any more or less popular than black slavery. Or indigenous people's slavery.
Pas besoin d'aller très très loin pour se croire irlandais. Quand tu passes le lac de Chalin où tu plonges à Hélé. Hey!
Fairy was flying off the shelves. Even now, the Jura is a beautiful but inaccessible mountainous region. Narrow, twisty-turny roads, often single track, to get between towns. Since Greek times, it had been used as a medicine, this wormwood concoction, absinthion. Wormwood leaves soaked in a spirit. This ancient absinthe was supposed to have aided childbirth. Hippocrates, often considered the first physician, prescribed it for menstrual pain, jaundice, anemia and rheumatism. Roman scholar Pliny the Elder describes chariot race champions drinking absinthion, its taste reminding them that glory has its bitter side, a sentiment wholeheartedly embraced by later enthusiasts. The physician in the 2nd century suggested wormwood absinthe as a folk medicine for stomach relaxation and as a remedy for swooning. 1600 British herbalist John Gerard. Wormwood voideth away the worms of the guts. This evocative connection helped solidify Artemisia absinthium's common English name when the bubonic plague returned to England in the 17th and 18th centuries, 1600s and 1700s. Many people burned wormwood to fumigate infected houses. But France's successes in Algeria and people wanting to align themselves with the new victorious empire began asking for a green. Those 100,000 soldiers in the heat with the bad water, taking its toll through fevers, tearing through their ranks. Yeah, let's blame the soldiers. But by the First World War, there were very different concerns. And the green was made evil. Thanks to Jura production, it was still able to deliver more force for the franc, with its high-proof potency. Some would water it down more than others. The defiant insouciance associated with it was the aspect that was getting it banned. A combination of economic interests, dubious science, and a fear of social change, and the tabloid stories that used murder to inflame readers' imagination and fuel the temperance movements, turned the green fairy into the green demon. Wormwood's a very hardy plant that grows in European regions of high altitude. The plant grows particularly well in the Franco-Swiss border in Jura Mountains. In the late 18th century, in the river valley called Val de Travers, on the Swiss side, people began mixing wormwood with fennel and lemon to produce the drink. 1830, production was moved across the border to Pontarlier in France to cut down on import taxes. Pontarlier, one of the places that we've visited here in this video on the Jura towns. The spirit became emblematic of the region. Aperitif, I beg your pardon. The same recipe isn't used at the historic caves like it was in 1805 when Pernod first started using Pontarlier wormwood. The drink louches when water's added. It goes cloudy. It does look like you're doing your own little experiment on yourself. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it's got a grassy and floral with aroma with a violet blossom, fennel, coriander and aniseed. With water, the aniseed, fennel and coriander, still grassy, but floral aromas are much more subdued. It's a clean and fresh drink. Dry and slightly on the bitter side. The woody herbal wormwood notes are freshened and lifted by the coriander and the aniseed. It does benefit from a little sugar. The green, once banned, would be sold under counters and in backroom bars around the Jura area, known as cow's milk. Pernod invented pastis to replace absinthe. But by that time, they could already afford their own private island off the Côte d'Azur. 10 million litres a year in the first 20 years. 50 years later, it had only increased by another 5 million.
Y a bien des coins qui se ressemblent, alors pourquoi pas croire qu'on n'est pas si loin de l'Irlande et qu'on aime chanter et boire. Et même si t'as pas dans ton verre du whisky ou de la bière, un coup Jura, ça fera l'affaire, ça met la tête à l'envers. Et même si t'as pas dans ton verre du whisky ou de la bière, un coup Jura, ça fera l'affaire, ça met la tête à l'envers.
A minority of artists and poets evangelised loudly in favour of the green fairy. Absinthe became synonymous with mad genius, as literary luminaries like Paul Verlaine and Arthur Rimbaud sang of its praises. In 1859, Edward Manet painted The Absinthe Drinker, a realistic portrait of a street bum clad in rags and wearing a gnarled top hat, his left foot thrust forward in defiant insouciance. Next to him sits an emerald glass. If something's more than 70% proof, it's going to affect you much more than 40%, like whiskey is now. It's going to affect different people's mental health, different to others. You are essentially pickling and poisoning your own body. Green, but it doesn't count as one of your 5 a day, fruits and vegetables. Manet's painting was rejected from that year's Salon of Paris. It caused his mentor, Thomas Couture, to shake his head. "My poor friend, you are the absinthe drinker. It is you who have lost your moral faculty." Manet had dared to portray absinthe intoxication realistically. His painting gave the subject an insolent grandeur. he had to get another mentor. Charles Beaudelaire had declared, "One must be drunk always, with wine, poetry, or with virtue, your choice, but intoxicate yourself." Absinthe users idealised intoxication. Polite society didn't. And just the same as that wormwood mix had been added to wine in Algeria, there were opiates being added to the absinthe by some few. There was the absinthe mythology of the green fairy, of liberation, of altered perceptions and unveiled meanings, appealed to creative libertines around the world. Vincent van Gogh was a convert, as was Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. Playwright Alfred Jarry sought his destruction in absinthe. Pablo Picasso dabbled in it for a time, painting The Absinthe Drinker and the Cubist Breakthrough, The Glass of Absinthe, but never gave himself over to it. Oscar Wilde declared a glass of absinthe is as poetical as anything in the world. What difference is there between a glass of absinthe and a sunset? There is a liturgy, a ceremony to preparing the absinthe with sugar to sweeten the bitterness, the colour, the alchemy of the cloudy transformation, and the 70% proof soaked through into the sugar creates quite a flame if you light it. This paraphernalia was also added to by posters advertising, even paraphernalia containing the water that's added to it after pouring. Hemingway, not a decadent or a dandy, just like getting drunk on the stuff. Opaque, bitter, tongue-numbing, brain-warming, stomach-warming, idea-changing liquid alchemy. It's supposed to rot your brain out, but I don't believe it. It only changes the ideas, succinctly capturing the danger and allure of the pale green drink. New ideas or madness? Une correspondance pour Charenton, a ticket to Charenton, the insane asylum outside Paris. The most systematic studies of absinthe toxicity took place at another Paris asylum under the supervision of a psychiatrist seeking to prove that absinthe did indeed rot your brain out. Valentin Magnan, an influential and well-respected psychiatrist, was appointed physician-in-chief of France's main asylum, Sainte-Anne, in 1867 and became the national authority on mental illness. It diagnosed a steady decline in French culture, not uncommon belief. He ignored the wild sinister, but expressed concerns about the fitness of the French population. A nationalist who believed in the French race. The concept of degeneration had become popular among public officials and those wanting to promote hereditary ideas in public discussion. Degenerates of a different kind. Cries of a once great nation now in decline. Action and anger were spurred amongst scientific and statistical confusion. Nothing to do with modern industrial life or at-risk psyches. Higher living standards create lower birth rates that fueled the army and cheap labour. But in 1870, science was popular. Experiments were done. He placed a guinea pig in a glass case with a saucer of pure alcohol. A second guinea pig got its own case and a saucer of wormwood oil. This experiment was carried out with a pair of cats as well, and a pair of rabbits, both with saucers of wormwood oil. He watched the three animals inhaling the wormwood fumes, grew excited, and then fell into seizures. The alcohol-breathing animal merely got drunk. So these results were ascribed to his patients then, whether that was happening or not. They suffered from seizures, he wrote down, violent fits, he wrote down, and bouts of amnesia. The Lancet wasn't so impressed with his science methodology. Mainly high doses on a little animal and trace amounts in a bigger animal. But long time after the 100 Years' War, France and England, it was still in England's best interest that France degenerate anyway. But Germany's 41 million citizens, compared to France's 36 million citizens, was of greater concern. Birth rates again. Unfitness to fight. The Green Fairy caused abortion in women and sterilised men, and robbed a nation of its pride, its soldiers. France. But those of Beaudelaire's mindset were losing. But it did take a bit of propaganda in the sense of absinthe makes you murder your own family. The Green Fairy tells you to. Someone drunk all day came home and shot their wife, daughter and son after a bit of an argument. Regretted it afterwards, of course. But they had 2 glasses of absinthe that day amongst all the wine. Yes, physicians still touted its health benefits, prescribing it for gout and dropsy, as a general stimulant of mind and body, as a fever reducer, and as the perfect drink for hot climates. Amid the medical uncertainty, support for an outright ban remained a minority position. Dijon was the active ingredient isolated, the cause of all those convulsions and hallucinations. 2011, there's a maximum limit on Dijon concentrations in the products that have rekindled a little bit of popularity. But it's not all debauchery in the Jura. The mountains are geologically fascinating and beautiful to walk, and drive the twists and turns. Even at night, with the rock walls right down to the road, you can't see the drop-offs, and you can see lights coming. It's arguably safer. In August 1901, it was thundering above Pontarlier, the main producer of absinthe. This was a day that the Green Fairy would lose out to Thor. It's a sad day indeed. The Pernod Distillery was struck by lightning and fire broke out in the factory on the Doubs River bank. The Doubs River is quite fascinating, a link to the geology. In part, it just disappears into a fault, and then a few kilometres downstream re-emerges as the River Lou. But this was only discovered by a man 2 days after the lightning, walking 15 kilometres away on the banks of the Lou, a small river, noticed an aniseed smell and the unusually green water. The two rivers linking underground. Fearing the fire at the factory, ablaze, vats of high-strength alcohol were never going to be good for the town. An employee opened all the taps and thousands of litres of absinthe were poured directly into the river. It worked as a trace for the source of the river, but did anyone interview the fish and the wildlife along the riverbank of these two rivers? They could have probably talked to us. The wildlife hallucinating that hard? It could have been Dr. Dolittle. total in reverse. It is a geologically fascinating area, though. If you can imagine undulating ridges, a W form in section, if you like. One groove of the W, a river runs towards the Rhine in Germany. The other groove of the W runs towards the Rhone River in France. A most peculiar natural setup. There's very few routes over or through the ridges. There's the route of the Titans, of course. But in France, the B roads are always rewarded. And someone's always trying to sell you aniseed something, be it sweet treats or bread, chocolates or ice cream. How do you feel about an aniseed flavoured cheese? It's not as bad as it sounds. Yes, the 48-kilometre Absinthe Road is a good place to start, a good introduction to the Jura Mountains. Landscape and towns, plantations, drying barns, museums, distilleries and shops. Nareg in Switzerland. You don't need to go there though, you're just going to have to pay extra for a visa-like thing for your car to get into Switzerland. Just stick to the French Jura. And stray off the tourist trail. Don't neglect to visit a fruitière. And the charcuterie's good. But you haven't done Doubs if you haven't had an absinthe creme brulee. Pastis is the same thing as Pernod. The beautiful green Val de Travers Valley. The people have always, this last century at least, been involved in clandestine production and consumption using opaque Ovaltine cups, mugs. But did they put their absinthe into the Ovaltine beverage? Did the locals get up and glow like Ready Breck? Francois Mitterrand, 1980s, the President of France, visited the Jura region and tried the creme brulee with a slight spearmint flavour that absinthe imparts to it. The bootleggers had got to the President. While he was tripping, I suppose, you'd say. Often credited to could have poisoned absinthe drinkers, and inferior alcohol used by distillers eager to turn a quick profit could also have led to impaired vision. But ethanol is the most likely culprit. To keep wormwood oil in solution requires more than 50% alcohol by volume. Without the glamorous posters and tabloid literary enchantments, absinthe is a much sadder chronic alcoholism. Edward Degas' 1876 L'Absinthe painting says it all for me. It's got to be seen as one of the first big triumphs for marketing. There are still a few people that speak their mother tongue Arpita language. Dialect, I suppose they've got a flag, but they haven't got an army, so it's a dialect. You're not hearing things that is different to French. Jura wines are also distinct. Forget the green, go with the yellow wines. Vin jaune. It's expensive, it's a bit like the sherry process, developing under a flaw of yeast, using Savagnin grapes, Poulsard, Truffaut, and Chardonnay grapes. But there's no real large-scale industrial enterprises. This is rural France. And that's what you want when you discover.
Il grimpe de la plaine à l'assaut des montagnes. Domine l'Helvétie, se mire dans le Léman. À ses pieds, le Gexois étale sa campagne. On dit de lui qu'il est balcon sur le Mont Blanc.
Worth visiting. Vesoul à Bois and Lons-le-Saunier. It's not difficult still to see it as a region of rebels that would plunder richer neighbouring Burgundy. Enclaves like Montbéliard remained outside French control. The French Compte was one of the last places of France to have serfdom. 1784, half the population consisted of serfs. Okay, 400,000 out of 1 million French serfs in this one region. Landowners took 1/12 of the sales price if a serf, main mortable, wanted to sell up. Serfs were not forced to stay on the land, but the lord could claim droit de suite, whereby a peasant who died away from his holding left it to the lord, even if he had heirs. A runaway serf's land was forfeit after 10 years. Louis XVI issued a decree banning these practices on 1779, but the Parliament in Besançon blocked this until 1787. I've said it before, rural France is a law unto itself. Rural France isn't Paris. Houses perched on stilts in the river. Region of lakes and land of gorges, waterfalls. A domed belfry to every tiny village, with mosaics and tiles or slate beaten from metal. There is a bit of coal mining and motor vehicle parts manufacture, but basically it's rural. But interesting rural, not just flat fields rural. Go on a hike, beautiful.
Quand par les orages, les jours de mauvais temps, noyé dans les nuages, il donne de la voix. Ce n'est pas par bravade, mais c'est tout simplement pour saluer Voltaire en pays genevois. Ce pays c'est le mien, il se nomme Jura. Ce pays c'est le mien, il se nomme Jura. C'est le pays des sources et des eaux souterraines.
Beaudelaire, very bland Swiss fella. High active ingredient through Jean. Wormwood absinthe was responsible for the moral decay, obviously, but it turned into a violent threat to society with those murders that I mentioned earlier. When you're pickling yourself with 70% alcohol, tuberculosis does start to become a threat if you're drinking milk. Unpasteurised as well. The temperance movement and politicians were fine opponents to the Beaudelaire decadence, not a politically active lot. France was soon to be freed from the shackles of the Green Devil, the legend of some of Paris's most decadent years, and the bootleggers near Switzerland kept the dream alive. So our Dijon C10H16O in 1975 was compared to tetrahydrocannabinoid, THC, the active ingredient in cannabis, which were found to have very similar molecular geometry and functioning groups enabling the metabolism in humans. They're both terpenoids, and though this large group contains salvinorin A, the psychotropic molecule in Salvia divinorum, it also includes fewer controversial molecules such as camphor and menthol. There is some affinity for the cannabinoid receptors, but not to the same stimulating effect as THC. Any intoxicating effects are not the same as those of marijuana's active ingredient, basically. However, the GABA receptor activation in extremely high cumulative doses can cause spasms and convulsions. Wormwood essential oil. It probably depended on the year, on the season. More likely in these times of adulteration of food, copper sulfate, antimony or chloride could have poisoned absinthe drinkers, and inferior alcohol used by distillers eager to turn a quick profit could also have led to impaired vision. But ethanol is the most likely culprit. To keep wormwood in solution requires more than 50% alcohol by volume. without the glamorous posters and tabloid literary enchantments. Absinthe is a much sadder chronic alcoholism. Edward Degas' 1876 L'Absinthe painting says it all for me. It's got to be seen as one of the first big triumphs for marketing. There are still a few people that speak their mother tongue Arpita language. Dialect, I suppose they've got a flag, but they haven't got an army, so it's a dialect. You're not hearing things that is different to French. Jura wines are also distinct. Forget the green, go with the yellow wines. Vin jaune is expensive, it's a bit like the cherry process, developing under a floor of yeast, using Savagnin grapes, Poulsard, Truffaut and Chardonnay grapes. But there's no real large-scale industrial enterprises. This is rural France. And that's what you want when you're discovering something almost untouched. Dole was once the capital, Bressancourt definitely.